Hello everyone and welcome to another video. This video we are going to be focusing on converting fractions into decimals. So last video we looked at equivalent fractions, adding and subtracting them, and this time we're going to look at turning those fractions into our decimals. So on my screen I have got a 100 square. Now we are going to pretend that this 100 square is one whole. Now it's been split into 100 different parts, but this whole thing makes up one whole. So if I was to make this into fractions, let's say I coloured in one of our squares. That one square is going to be 1/100th. Because I have coloured in one square out of my 100 squares. Now, we can use this for any of those number of squares. So let's say I decided I was going to colour in, I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I've got 5 of my 100 squares in, this is 5/100ths. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at what one whole row is. So I've got my 5 coloured in, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 parts coloured in gives me 10/100ths. Now this is also 1/10 because I've got one row out of 10 rows coloured in. And if you can see, I've just written down the side of the numbers 1 to 10 because that's the amount of rows that I've got coloured in. I've got one whole row out of 10 coloured in there. So if I was then to go on and do some more, if I coloured in another 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, I've got 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 out of 100. Now I don't have another whole row, but if I coloured in that whole row again, so I went all the way to the end of that row, I've got 2 whole rows coloured in. So in my 2 whole rows, I can say I've got 2 out of my 10 whole rows coloured in. If I wanted to do it with my hundredths, I would have 20 of my 100 squares coloured in. Now this is where we're going to look at doing this as fractions. So I'm actually going to change my colour now, and let's do it in a red. If I wanted to do this as a decimal, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. So let's take my 1/10 for example. I've coloured in, I'm going to colour in over the top all of that first row. So I've got my whole first row, I've got my 1/10 coloured in. Now as a decimal, what we'd do with that is we would actually have that as 0.1. That is because what we've got is 1/10. And if I look, I'm just going to change this up a little bit now. If I'm just going to rub all of these out so that, whoops, didn't mean to rub all of that out. I'm going to rub all of these out just so that we can take a look at what it is with our place value grid. So I had my 1/10 or 10/100ths, and if I look at it in my place value grid, what I'm actually doing is this is telling me, so this one here is telling me 1 divided by 10, or this one is telling me 10 divided by 100, because that's what that line actually stands for. It's a division symbol. It's just our way of doing it. It's saying 1 divided by 10. And that's how we work it out as a decimal. It is the top number divided by that bottom number, our numerator divided by our denominator. So 1 divided by 10, if I go to my place value grid, I put in the number 1. I'm dividing that by 10, which means I jump 1 place value down that way. My 1 now goes here. But I can't keep that other one in there because I've moved it. So what has to go in there is, because we had no numbers in front of that number, we've got to put our placeholder. And our placeholder is always a 0. So 1/10 actually equals 0.1. If I had 10 divided by 100, I'll show you that one because that was our 10 hundredths. If I show you what that one is, let's go back to our red. I had 10 and I wanted to divide it by 100. Dividing by 100 moves it 2 places down the place value column. So I would go 1 and 2, my 0 would go there, my 1 would go 1 and 2, 1 would go there. Now let's rub out the 2 numbers that we've moved because we don't need those anymore. And let's take a look. Because we've got no number in our ones, that needs to put our place value, that needs to put our place value holder there as a 0. Now we don't need that 0 in the hundredths column because it doesn't have any value there at the moment. It's a 0 and it's after our decimal place value, so we don't need that. We still end up with exactly the same answer, 0.1. Now where it starts getting a little bit more tricky is when you start looking at the different numbers within our hundredths. So if I had, I'm just going to go from the bottom this time. We're going to forget those top ones and we're going to go from the bottom. I'm going to change to a different colour. Let's go for green. I'm going to colour in the bottom ones this time. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Let's go for 17. So I've got 17 100ths there. Now what I can do with this is I can do 17 divided by 100. And if I need it, I can use my place value grid. I can put my 17 in there. I'm going to divide it by 100, which moves 2 place value steps down or to the right. 1, 2. My 7 goes into my hundredths. 1, let's move it 2 place value columns. 1, 2. My 1 goes in the tenths. Now what I can do is I can rub out my 17 that were in the tenths and the ones. And I need to make sure in my ones column I put my placeholder, my 0. So what this equals is 0.17. Now, it's going to get a little bit more tricky now. So this is moving on an extra step. Sometimes you're going to be asked to convert fractions into decimals that have absolutely nothing to do with 100 square. So you might be asked, I'm going to go back to my normal black colour there, you might be asked to do 10/20ths. Can you convert 10/20ths into a decimal? Now there is a way to do this still using your number square. All you've got to do is find out what your answer would be if it was in the hundredths. So like we were doing before when we were converting fractions and doing things like that, we need to convert this fraction from 20 into 100. So what does 20 times by to get to 100? Let's work it out. So 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, it times this by 5. So I'm going to put times by 5 on there. Remember, whatever I do to the denominator, I need to do to the numerator and vice versa. So 10 times by 5, I know that gives me 50. So I've got 50 100ths. I need to convert that into a decimal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. Put my number 50 in, and I'm going to move it 2 place value columns to the right. 1, 2, 1, 2, 5 goes in there, 0 goes in there. Now I'm going to rub out all of those other bits that I was doing, and I'm going to put my placeholder in the ones column. So I've got 0.50. We don't say 0.50 because with decimals we say it a bit differently. Just like we wouldn't have said 0.17 for the last one, it's 0.17. So there was one thing that I said, we do not need this one here. We do not need this 0, so we can rub that one out. So I end up with 0.5 as my answer. Okay, that is how you convert fractions into decimals. I hope this was useful. I thought I would do a much shorter one this time because the other one went on for a long time. So remember, if you want me to cover any topics or if there's anything that you are confused about and you think you might need some help, it could be maths, it could be English, it could be grammar, it could be anything that you want to do with any sort of schoolwork. Feel free to leave a comment down below talking about what it is that you would like me to cover, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!